again. Welcome back. My name is Sherry Marks. I'm the pastor of the Church of the Open Door in Ukiah, California. And this is today's message, this week's message. And for any of you who are first-timers here, the message that I've been doing recently is a little different than usual in that I've been going with thoughts that trigger my thinking, that catch my attention in things I read, things I see on TV or online. And then I take those thoughts and I work back through Scripture to see if Scripture has anything to say on the same subject. So here's my message for this week. They were not allowed to do what they did. They were blocked from doing it, and they did it anyway. They did it anyway. Those are the few words, not very many at all, but they triggered today's message. They were written by my friend John Hughes, who is a PhD psychologist and an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. More importantly, at least to me, John was one of my seminary buddies, and we are still friends after all these years via Facebook. John has a brilliant and active mind that constantly ranges over a multitude of social and political justice issues, and I'm often challenged by his interests and his knowledge, excuse me, and the things that he posts. This is what John originally posted one day. I have been reading about 1847 women, the Blackwell sisters, Congregational members and Unitarians from New York State, and Lucretia Mott, a Quaker minister, and her group around Philadelphia, and Antoinette Brown, who was the first woman as Congregational minister. What strikes me is they were not allowed to do what they did. They were blocked from doing it, and they did it anyway. They did it anyway. And so I had to go look up these women to make sure that I did indeed know correctly who they were. Elizabeth Blackwell was born in England in 1821 and emigrated to the United States with her family as a child, and she was America's first female doctor. She was rejected because of her gender and for no other reason by every medical college to which she applied, except Geneva Medical College, which eventually granted her her Doctor of Medicine degree. Elizabeth's younger sister Emily followed her as the third woman doctor in the U.S. Lucretia Mott was an abolitionist and a women's rights activist. After she was excluded from an international anti-slavery convention in 1840, simply because she was a woman again, she apparently decided that the role of women needed to be reshaped, and she set out to do so. Antoinette Brown was the first woman to be ordained in a mainline Protestant denomination, ordained as minister here in the United States, specifically in the Congregational Church. So at a time when women were expected to be submissive and quietly in the background, these women and others like them refused their allotted roles and forged their own way. And this led me to wonder about who and when people in Scripture chose to forge their own way. I was surprised, although not after I thought about it so much, such stories are few and far between, because most of Scripture consists of teaching people to obey the rules and to do what they were told. To disobey or to disagree with the authorities of the time, whether civil or religious, was tantamount to disobeying God. Even Jesus, while most often demonstrating a resistance to the prevailing norms, rarely spoke about breaking rules. The first scripture that I managed to find that seems to fit our storyline today is the story of Mary and Martha, as it's told in the 10th chapter of Luke's Gospel. Now as Jesus and his followers went on their way, a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, and she came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." Mary's role was laid out for her from birth. In a culture stuffed to the gills with rules on how to do everything, women were meant to be subservient, period. This belief was based in the creation of Adam and Eve as told in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, where Adam was created first and then later Eve was created. Not from the earth as Adam had been, but from one of Adam's own ribs, therefore making it blindingly clear to the Hebrew thinking that women were intended to be secondary to men. Mary chose differently. She chose to step out of the role that the rules appeared to set for her, and Jesus supported her in this choice. She was allowed to join the men learning from Jesus. We might also include, as an example from the Old Testament this time, Miriam, sister to Moses and Aaron. The story is found in the book of Numbers, chapter 12. Miriam was a prophet and one of the leaders of the Hebrew people in her own right, until she was abruptly stricken with leprosy for the crime of speaking out publicly in defense of Zipporah, Moses' wife. Moses had suddenly and without explanation separated himself from Zipporah, and Miriam defended her as having done nothing to deserve this action, which was quite shaming in their culture. God appears to have grown angry at this because he privately told Moses to leave Zipporah and to live celibately as a sign of his advancing prophet status. God punished Miriam for the crime, again, of disrespecting Moses in public with her defense of Zipporah. Eventually, Moses asked God to forgive Miriam, and she was cured of her leprosy, and she lived out the rest of her life still as one of the leaders of the people and was remembered with great honor. And the last story that I was able to come up with that fit our guidelines for today is the story of Jesus and the Canaanite woman, as told in Matthew 15. When she tried to ask Jesus to cure her ailing daughter, the disciples turned her away because, as a Canaanite, she would have been considered unclean and undeserving of Jesus' attention. Even Jesus, when pushed, responded with, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." But when she persisted, the apparently annoyed Jesus told her, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." The woman replied with the now famous line that, Even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. She stood her ground. She argued with Jesus that she had the right to ask for his help. And she won. Jesus conceded her point and cured her sick daughter, and then praised the woman's faith. Even though the people who originally caught my attention here were all women, I did not particularly set out to use only women in my scriptural examples. But as it turned out, women were the only examples that I found. Perhaps that is because women more often then, as still now, had to stand up and fight for their right to be seen and heard, or remain silent and accepting. Perhaps it is simply that a woman arguing for her rights was more newsworthy, and so it got written down and included in various scriptural settings. Sort of a man bites dog story. So unusual that it merited to be kept. There are certainly stories of men speaking out when doing so put them against public opinion, but not too many of them being silenced before they ever had a chance to speak. I'm going to throw in here, finally, one of my favorite stories, which may or may not fit my original premise. I'm not sure it does, but it is a great story. It's found in John's Gospel, chapter 9. It's the story of the man born blind. Jesus had healed this man, but he did so on the Sabbath. And so, of course, the Pharisees were livid and set out to find criminal charges they could levy against Jesus. They asked the man how Jesus could possibly have cured him, and his response was simply, "I don't know." Then they went and they asked the man's parents, but their response was the same, "We don't know." So they went back to the once blind man, determined to catch him saying something that they could use to accuse Jesus. His response was perfect. "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see." He then went on to ask them, "I've told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" It would have been marvelous to be a fly on the wall to hear that conversation. But yes, I do. I want to hear those stories again and again. The stories of people insisting on their right to speak their own truth, those who refuse to be shushed and pushed aside. All those who, in my friend John's words, were blocked from doing it, and they did it anyway. They did it anyway. So hooray for them, and thanks be to God. Thank you for being with us today. We're happy that you joined us. Have a gracious week ahead of you, and may your week, your world be blessed.
Founded on love, welcome and hope, we're the Church of the Open Door. You are welcome here. We invite you in to share the bread, to share